management, Chris Wintermeyer has helped thousands of companies develop and deploy business intelligence solutions that improve visibility and increase profitability. He specializes in business intelligence, analytics, and data visualization, helping executives make sense of data to drive better business outcomes. Chris is now leveraging his extensive background as chief advocate at Domo. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to you, Chris.
Karen, thanks for that intro. You definitely made me sound awesome. I'm going to have to send you some cash in the mail. And gang, just as you can see there from the picture was put together by the marketing team, the one thing Karen forgot to mention is I had a stint early on in The Family Feud, so in case you don't recognize that picture. So let's get started. Let's talk specifically around some metrics that I've worked with a lot when helping sales executives in companies of all different sizes maximize their sales efficiency. And it's typically, but not always, a case where the executives know some of the things that they want to measure, and in some cases they're very fixed on those particular metrics, but have reached out to us, or others around them have reached out to us and said, what else should we be looking at? How can we do better than we're doing today? So what I want to do is walk through, we've got 20 metrics to talk about here today. The first one on the screen is pipeline velocity. In other words, how fast is your pipeline moving? So let's talk specifically about that pipeline performance measurement. You know, for a long time, the number of deals in the pipeline or the total value of the pipeline was the standard way to access the picture of future success. Yet a lot of sales execs were frustrated that they couldn't accurately predict the number, the monthly number, or the quarterly number from that pipeline value. And now I've been told by a lot of sales VPs that they need a better handle on that total pipeline picture. And that's when I've several years ago really started focusing on pipeline velocity, and something that I now strongly encourage for the majority of my customers. It's a key metric that indicates, quite simply, how fast are my qualified opportunities moving through the funnel and turning into closed deals. So if you start monitoring how quickly your deals are moving through each stage of that buying process, and then relate that to actual revenue that's realized from those deals, you can start to more accurately predict your sales in the short term, and it helps you avoid becoming that VP of sales roadkill. The next one that we're looking at is winning percentage. And quite simply, this is what percentage of deals do your reps actually win? Sales execs have always kept a close eye on the number of deals that their sales reps are managing, but that's like a baseball player choosing his starting lineup based on the number of at-bats that the player has, not on how many hits they get or how often they're reaching base. The number of deals a sales rep is working on, it doesn't say much about the future of those deals. A sales rep might have 50 deals that they're working at any given time, but if only one of those things closes, then obviously something's seriously wrong. So the metric around winning percentage shouldn't just be how many times salespeople step up to the plate. It should be how many hits they get when they're at bat. So if historically your sales reps close an average of 35% of the deals that they're working on, then you can use that average to predict how many of their current deals are going to convert into actual sales. And with that, you can better forecast future success and obviously plan accordingly. The next one on our list is closing speed. How long are the deals taking to convert? From inception, something like a form fill on a website or a booth scan at a trade show, all the way to close, how long does it take the deal to make it through the complete sales cycle? Is it a month? Is it a year? Is it somewhere in between? Do different reps have different closing speeds? And are there certain stages where things hang, like from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead? So just as it's important to look at each stage, we're looking now at the closing speed through the overall process itself. And it's critical to understand a baseline of how long things should take, whether that's an average, whether that's a number that you come up with that you then apply to the sales team. And that's so that forecast and rep performance can be measured against that baseline. And you need to understand the fallout. If you get 1,000 leads from the website, how many are going to make that through to a closed deal? Again, what's my historical average and what's my target? Now I've got bench lines against which, or baselines against which I can manage this. And this gives us an idea of how much marketing budget needs to be invested in order to hit those numbers. And more importantly, especially if you're in an omni-channel environment, it helps you figure out which channels are actually worth investing in to be able to get those deals all the way through from lead to close. The next one on our list is acquisition costs. And by the way, gang, I think there are a lot of things here that could very much be considered status quo, that you may be looking at these so far and going, these are ones that I already measure. Show me something I don't know. And that was really the point of the ones that I selected here today is I wanted to make sure that we were covering all the bases, not just some that may be new and interesting or different, but also to validate the ones that you're using. So if you're scratching your head right now, if you're looking at the clock going, how long is this going to take? All he's going to do is tell me stuff that I've already got. Keep in mind, like I say, this is designed for sales execs and for sales leaders and for salespeople of all backgrounds and in a variety of industries, which is why I've chosen the ones I've chosen here. And this is one that, the reason I bring that up right now is this is one that has happened to bring up a conversation when I was prepping for this. Is, Chris, why are we talking about acquisition costs? This one is, it's a no-brainer. It's a duh. And I was like, well, faux shizzle, it's definitely a no-brainer, but it's one of those things that you win by losing sometimes. And I know some sales execs who have actually done this. They've had deals that cost the company so much to acquire in terms of the cost of travel and entertainment and compensation that the company would have actually been better off just not winning the deal in the first place, which is why I think it's important to be looking at this. I actually spoke with one sales director on a recent Domo engagement who said, he told me literally within weeks of tracking the metric, he was able to identify who were the most valuable and cost-effective sales teams and then do that over a period of time. In fact, in this case, he said that he even discovered a particular salesperson had spent more money flying himself, technical teams, and some of the exec folks into the prospect's headquarters that there was no profitability on the deal whatsoever. And this was a deal that was initially considered very important to the company. It was something that was going to bring in a lot of money. But what they had turned out was the money spent was 2 times what the deal was sold for. And there just wasn't any viable upside business. So they had basically thrown money away. I mean, obviously they've got the customer and they've got the logo, but it definitely wasn't the type of profitability they were looking for. And in this particular case, the conversations with his sales teams changed dramatically after that, once he started measuring that acquisition cost. So if this is something that you're not looking at, it's definitely something that you should be. Now, gang, I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to stop with the metrics. I just want to see if anyone's actually paying attention or if we're all just watching Oprah. So what I'd like to do is just get a little pulse, a finger on the pulse from you guys. In terms of the metrics that you're currently looking at, the things that you're actually measuring and monitoring in your environment, what's the biggest challenge with those sales metrics? Is it that they're not found in a single location? Is it they require a lot of manual upkeep? Is it they don't answer the right questions at all? Or is it that the data isn't trustworthy? So let's go ahead and take a few seconds right now, if you don't mind, and go ahead and get your voting fingers ready. And let's take a peek here in just a second on what you guys are seeing is the biggest challenge with sales metrics. Again, you got to go to different places to get them. Well, I've got them, but it takes a long time and a lot of work to keep them up to date. I've got metrics, but it's definitely not answering the questions that I want to know. Or the data isn't trustworthy. I'm looking at it, but I just don't trust these numbers themselves. So I'm guessing that we're going to see a lot of answer A, they're not found in a single location, as well as C, they don't answer the right questions. That's what I hear most often when I'm interacting with sales executives who have come to Domo and said, hey, can you help me get all my data in one place and take a look? So right now, it sure looks like it's pretty well spread except for C. I'm going to stop the audience voting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it looks like out of the votes that we got, pretty much they require a lot of manual upkeep and they aren't found in a single location. We're neck and neck. Not a lot at all on they don't answer the right questions. That's surprising to me. That's definitely not what I expected. And the data isn't trustworthy is one that we hear on a regular basis, and that can be done for a variety of different reasons, which one of the advantages of Domo is that we can help you figure out how do you make that data actually trustworthy itself. So let's go on to the next slide, gang, and let's talk about new logos. And this is one that's important not just for startups, but also for organizations that have been around for a while. Not all sales are created equal. What if the top producer at your company is bringing in $1 million a year, but and for those sales year after year are coming from the same 5 companies? I mean, obviously that total dollar amount is great, right? It's a welcome addition to the top line. But the real growth, often the kind that's going to excite people like shareholders, as well as frighten people like the competitors, and can be used to attract top talent, it's driven by your net new customers, not just the ones you've already got, and the recurring revenue from those year after year. So if you've got one guy bringing in $1 million in sales from 5 companies, let's flip that on its head. Say you've got another sales rep on your team, and that rep brings in 7 new deals worth $600,000. Okay, it's not as much from a dollar perspective as that $1 million that your top producer brought in, but don't lose sight of the fact that those are still 7 big wins that will likely prove far more valuable down the road in terms of opportunities to expand. Not to mention the marketing and public relations value that comes along with the brand, a new brand name client. So just something to keep in mind is it's not always just about the recurring revenue. What can we do to frighten off the other guys and to get our shareholders and investors excited? And that's where that new logos comes in. Sales cycle time. This is something that's important specifically if you've got multiple distribution channels, or if we're looking at we're looking at deals where the information is being conveyed out and the relationships are going on from different types of sales teams. In other words, you have different types of customers. I see this a lot more in B2B sales, obviously, than I do in B2C. And if you ask a lot of those B2B sales execs about the length of their sales cycle, they'll rattle off very specific numbers in terms of months or days, or in some cases years, it takes to close the deal. But the real answer for most companies, at least the ones that I've dealt with in a variety of industries, is, well, that depends. It depends on what we're selling, where we're selling it, and who we're selling it to. Using a single figure for the overall sales cycle can be very damaging, specifically as you start to look at forecasts and staffing models. If the reality is that you've got customers of different sizes in different industries that have very different timelines, then you need to be able to have a benchmark for each one of those segments, not just for the overall deal cycle close. Now, if we look at something like lead to opportunity ratio, this is where we're asking the question, how many of your leads actually turn into opportunities? And in this particular case, I think that this KPI is one of the best tools for diagnosing roadblocks in the sales funnel. If the ratio of the leads to opportunities is too high, maybe you've got a quality problem, or maybe you've got a gap in skill sets, either in a specific rep or maybe a team of reps, which I've actually seen in several cases. But conversely, if that ratio is too low, you might have a quantity issue, and you're not able to fill your pipe with enough qualified opportunities to be able to hit the number that you've actually set for both the team and for the organization. Now, those thresholds are going to vary by company, but if you understand the balance between leads and opportunities, that can be a very useful weapon in the battle to drive greater performance. Next one on our list, most neglected opportunities. In other words, which opportunities have been stagnant the longest? So properly following up with potential clients, I mean, obviously it's a cornerstone of effective selling. I actually read a study from Follow Up Success that struck me. It was a couple years ago. It said that 80% of sales are made somewhere between the 5th and the 12th contact with the prospect. In other words, we're at least 5 touches in before we're actually seeing sales effectiveness get close to 80%. Now, watching your neglected opportunities is an effective way to help ensure that the appropriate follow-up is taking place, but also taking place at the right time. And it can help you identify common themes and characteristics of your stagnant opportunities that seem like they're not going to make it across the finish line. You can start to identify those trends and those patterns. And keep in mind, gang, it's important to be able to examine those opportunities, whether that's looking at individual reps, looking at the prospect cohorts, looking at product lines, looking at where those leads had actually been driven from, so that you can identify those weaknesses and bottlenecks. So it's more than just a number. It's about actually being able to break that down by a variety of dimensional factors so that you can start to understand, well, what's being neglected, but more importantly, why. So average selling price. How are the pricing changes affecting your revenue? You know, it goes without saying that even modest changes in product pricing can have a dramatic impact on revenue. But, you know, a lot of times I see that folks aren't keeping track of this number, and it's impossible to even consider making changes to selling price, let alone affect them, if you don't really know the true price point at which your products are being sold. And keep in mind, it's easy to start making assumptions about your pricing based on anecdotes from the sales team and, those quick glances or those cursory reviews of your new contract. If those assumptions are flawed, it can really dramatically impact your forecast and not in a very good way. So in addition to looking at the overall average selling price, it's also important to be able to look at that average selling price in different ways, breaking it down again by product, by time period is one that I don't see a lot of folks necessarily managing that can be extremely helpful to you, and also by customer segment. Without proper context, in my opinion, just a simple average selling price number is meaningless. Next on our list, average impressions to close. And this is not entirely dissimilar to looking at information around the most neglected opportunities, but there's a little bit of difference here. And by this, what we're looking at is how many touches does it actually take for an opportunity to close. And without this number, it then becomes very difficult for me to start to gauge when should I be engaging these touches and where are my breakdowns actually occurring inside my pipeline. Do you know how many touches it takes to close a deal in your organization? Obviously, based on the research that I talked about before from Follow-Up Success and that I've seen from a lot of other places, typically it's at least 5. But again, it depends on the industry and it depends on what your customer base looks like. And typically the larger the sale, the higher that number is going to be. What it is for your company and what it is for your sales reps is obviously going to be different than potentially the guy down the road selling a very different product. Accurately understanding this metric can not only help you better predict those close rates, because I know on average it takes 7 touches or 12 touches or 18 touches, that ultimately impacts being able to forecast revenue. And it can also help you regiment the sales process. It can more effectively identify the repeat patterns of success and allow you to identify those, to magnify those, and then share those with newer or less experienced or lagging leaders of the sales team to be able to allow them to start to, hopefully become more effective. Now, what about attach rate? This is something that's, it's obviously we're looking at the average amount of add-ons to the purpose or to the purchase. And this, again, is going to be something that's going to be dependent on your industry. But whether you're adding tens of thousands of dollars in something like professional services and software modules, or you could literally be upsizing a combo meal, attach rate is more than just a measure of those product add-ons. For a lot of businesses that derive significant profit from the long-term maintenance and things like service agreements, attach rate can help sales execs understand how much money is being left on the table with those existing customers. And if your business produces a software or hardware platform that is in many ways a commodity, say, for example, you're selling something like game consoles, then the attach rate of the game for that console is obviously what differentiates the market leaders from the rest of the pack. So I consider this one to be pretty critical. And if you're not measuring attach rate, and if you think it may not be applicable in your organization, you may want to think again. Next, revenue leakage. How much revenue are we giving away? What is it costing us in terms of things like discounts? I'm seeing a lot more organizations today taking revenue leakage seriously than I did even 5 years ago, and certainly more than 10 or 15 years ago. This measure is incredibly relevant, especially when you consider that buyers are making more online and mobile purchases than ever. And person-to-person interaction in the sales process, it's becoming increasingly rare. So without human oversight that's present in traditional purchases, it's possible for customers in online transactions specifically to get access to discounts that wouldn't normally apply to them. It's bad enough that many of those discounts are erroneous or are false, but a substantial percentage of discounts that shouldn't be applied can actually be fraudulent. Think about the frequent business traveler who books hotel rooms and rental cars using discount codes from some other company. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. How many times I've heard stories about others who have done that, because I would never do that. It's not dissimilar to the online purchaser who goes to those shady coupon code sites looking for those discount codes that were only supposed to be used by a specific customer. But for whatever reason, that code was able to be used more than once by a specific purchaser who then decides to share that out with others. Again, I, of course, would never even consider looking at those coupon sites or doing such a thing, but there are people out there. And consider this. There was a study by KPMG that found that 94% of telcos, which, by the way, that is the industry that watches revenue leakage the closest. 94% of telcos expect revenue leakage to continually increase over time. And half of that 94%, virtually almost 50% of those, believe that the leakage will be significant in terms of revenue impact, and that's all because of the explosion of big data and mobile commerce. So something to keep an eye on, specifically if you've got an online presence, and even if you don't, there are certainly ways that folks can try and skirt the system. So revenue leakage is one to keep your eye on. Sales rep scorecard. This is one of my favorites. It used to be that the sales rep scorecard back in the day was pretty straightforward. How much is the person closed? And that's really the number that was looked at or certainly relied upon most often. Today's scorecard basically is more complex. It has to encompass much more than just knowing what the salesperson has done, but start to anticipate and even predict what the salesperson is going to do. I mean, let's face it. I'm assuming the majority of us out there have known, or if I'm an exec, been burned by one-hit sales wonder. And in talking with a lot of sales leaders over the years, a lot of them agree that having a predictable salesperson where you can count on to have a mix of singles and doubles and triples and the occasional home run was way more valuable than the unpredictable one home run guy who then doesn't even get another swing at the plate. Seeing what a salesperson is doing to as a percent of converted leads to close, average age of open opportunities, average total opportunities, average deal size by stage. These are the things that are really interesting when you compare them against your benchmarks, and then also start to compare across reps or across teams. And by the way, this can also be used to even gamify the sales situation. I have customers who are taking metrics in Domo and throwing these up on wall boards and breaking out these metrics and allowing not just individuals but teams to be able to start to compare against one another and then compete to be able to increase their sales effectiveness. So again, what about customer lifecycle? How long is that time period between the customer's initial purchase and then the overall duration of their loyalty? You know, measuring customer lifecycle seems relatively simple, but to me, it's more than about just tracking the window of time before that customer decides they're going to bail. This metric can really help you identify all of the key exit points that could be plaguing the organization, whether it's, product-based or whether it's service-based. Being able to understand why these people are leaving and at what points in time, and then look at that historically, as well as learning the milestones in the customer experience from their perspective, it can help you isolate and then start to identify those critical upsell and cross-sell opportunities, as well as the times when it's not about additional revenue, when it's literally just about that customer touch, being able to reach out to them to ensure a high level of CSAT or customer satisfaction to ensure that you've got a shot at that upsell or cross-sell potential down the road. Next, percentage of repeat business. How many customers have purchased from you more than once, tying directly into the one that we just talked about? It's easy to think about repeat business in terms of incremental revenue gains, but the value of returning customers is a lot more important than any single purchase that customer makes. There was an article that I read a couple years ago. I think it was in Red-Eye. I honestly can't remember, but if anyone's curious, I can look it up and I'll get you a link to it. And it was talking about a specific retailer. It was one online retailer, and they had done a study and started to measure the metric and found that if a first-time buyer didn't make a second purchase within 6 weeks of the first purchase, the chance that buyer would not return was over 80%. Over 8 in 10 chance they would never see that customer again. But if the buyer made 2 purchases within that same 6-week period, even if the second purchase was minuscule or minor or it very little impacts to top line or bottom line revenue, there was a 70% chance that customer would return again and again. So that means regardless of what was purchased on the second visit, just that simple act of that buyer coming back in that 6-week period and completing that second transaction dramatically and positively impacted the long-term revenue potential of those particular customers. I thought that was a very interesting stat. And speaking of that, lifetime value of the customer. What is the total amount of sales revenue that the average customer is going to give me over the life of that relationship? And this is really about mindset, particularly about a mindset that has been revolutionized with the oncoming of the internet. It has very low barriers to entry. The cost to acquire customers is getting closer and closer to zero all the time. And if I'm looking at lifetime value as a core metric, that can help me as a sales exec place greater emphasis on customer service as well as long-term satisfaction instead of just trying to focus on the short-term win, right, on maximizing those short-term sales. And there's a guy that I really respect named Seth Godin that I think put it best. Here's what he said. Unsophisticated marketers and sales professionals will invest a lot in hoopla and in spin and in hype to get strangers to notice them, but notice them just once. And that makes the cost of the connection very, very high. And then once they borrow a little of that attention, they've put everything they've got into a one-shot transaction, which few people engage in. And those that do create little value because the permission asset is then discarded. And this is how he sums it up. I love this line. It's dates, not singles bars. It's selling subscriptions, not Vegematics and faux shizzle. That is definitely, I think, the right approach. Again, regardless of the industry that you're in, which is why I think lifetime value of the customer is something that's often overlooked, but can be incredibly valuable in helping you understand what's going on in the pipeline as well as in revenue prediction. Let's take a look at profit per customer visit. Obviously, this is what's the average amount of profit during any one customer visit, whether that's on site, could be online, could be over the phone. This is a staple metric. This is something that I see a lot in brick and mortar retail. It's been around since I got into the business about 25 years ago. But the metric's just as valuable in a wide variety of e-commerce settings. In fact, I think it's probably more valuable given how quickly e-commerce sites can change up that visitor experience by simply examining and reacting to the data about what users are doing on their particular site. Making that buying experience as frictionless as possible, and of course adding in an appropriate number of upsell offers, can drive valuable gains in that profit per customer number. But if you're not tracking profit per customer visit, it'd be very difficult for you to do that except by using gut feel, and we all know what the typical end result is when that's all we have to go on. And by the way, this metric is not just for retail and e-commerce folks. I work with a lot of healthcare companies who consider profit per customer, or in their case, profit per patient visit, to be an incredibly important metric as well. So again, if it's not something that you're looking at or not looking at in earnest, it may be time to take a new approach or a new look at that particular metric. Average new hire ramp-up time. What's the amount of time needed for a sales hire to reach productivity levels that are comparable with your seasoned employees? This is a secret weapon, I think, in a lot of organizations. I think this can be one that can dramatically impact how you forecast, how budgets are derived and maintained, and also get you a lot close to hitting your number. If you're looking at this metric around ramp-up time, it almost always has a positive impact. In fact, I recently worked with a sales VP who one year, it was actually last year, she had her budget slashed considerably, but she was still expected to hit the same number that was larger than it was the year before. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody out there. I've got less to make it happen, but I've got to bring more in when I get it done. Trying to figure out how to do more with less is always that challenge, but looking for any angle that this particular VP could muster, I told her she should start tracking this particular metric. And it turned out, after she'd looked at this for a few months, that her true average ramp-up time was 9 months. It was 9 months from the time the salesperson came on board until they could produce 100% reliable business. Based on what she had to go on, she was assuming it was half of that. So the number was very startling to her. That obviously put her in gear, and she figured out some ways to reduce that ramp-up time before it was too late for the reps that were already in that funnel, if you will. And it turned out to have a tremendously positive impact, and she made her sales goals for the year. Without knowing what this metric is and why, I just think you're missing out on key leverage in the challenge that every sales leader has, which is being able to do more and often being asked to do more with less. How about average lifts from new incentives? This one I think is fun. What's the bump in revenue attributed to new sales incentives? You know, sometimes to incent salespeople to close deals, in addition to their regular commission, management will concoct new strategies to just push the sales teams to give it everything they've got to get that ball over the goal and to get those deals to close. And it could be something like, you know, hit 100% of your goal and get 10% bonus, or close 3 new logos and we will give you a 60-inch plasma TV, or close a $1 million deal and we'll give you a trip to Fiji or, I don't know, somewhere fun. These things need to be tested to make sure they really work. And if you're not tracking that, if we're not able to match up those incentives over time to be able to see how that's impacting what that lift is or what the end sales result is by rep or by incentive or by time or by customer type, then those things are fun, don't get me wrong, and I'm sure as a sales rep, I would love to be able to have a shot at that. but you're not able to truly effectively understand which ones are better, right? Which ones are more impactful to the organization. And keep in mind, gang, these aren't always monetary. In fact, at Domo, we've got a massive rooster that's painted Domo blue. It is almost 7 feet tall. And the person who closes the largest deal in any particular week gets that rooster in their cubicle. In fact, in some cases, the rooster basically takes up the cubicle. It's a real source of pride and joy to be able to have that rooster. And so that's what we've used. And by actually tracking the metric, we found that having the rooster in the cube was a greater incentive to our reps, and in actuality was helping us close more of our small and medium business deals than a cash incentive, which if you had asked me that, I never would have thought that was the case. But having that big rooster is actually what did it for our reps. So speaking of cash, let's talk about share of wallet. What's the percentage of estimated budget in one deal? And by the way, for those of you that are saying, when, please, Lord, is this thing going to end? This is our last one. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll give you a little time to ask some questions. You know, when it comes to share of wallet, I'm hearing more and more sales execs that talk about wanting to measure this metric, but they're not actually doing it. Personally, once the execs start measuring it, I think that's a great thing. If you're not measuring share of wallet, in my opinion, you should be. And the best way that I know to put emphasis on this is to leverage a quote that I saw in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago, and it's about the value of this metric. Here's what HBR said. Companies spend a great deal of time and money trying to improve customer loyalty by measuring and managing metrics like satisfaction and net promoter scores. But traditional gauges of loyalty correlate poorly with what matters most, and that is, in fact, share of wallet. This is the percentage of customer spending within a category that's captured by a given brand or a given store or a given firm. Customers may be very satisfied with your brand and happily recommend it to others, but if they like your competitors just as much or even more, then you're obviously losing sales. I think that's a great quote. So obviously, again, being able to effectively identify share of wallet requires that you've got a relatively close relationship, and in some cases, depending on the industry, a trusted relationship with your customers. But once that relationship is established, this metric can help you take those relationships to new levels of value and profitability. And I've seen this firsthand in companies that I've worked with in my time here at Domo. So that's it. That's our 20. If you'd like to know more about Domo, or if you'd like to even take a tour of our solution, I'd love for you to hit us up. Best way to do it is to email sales@domo.com, and that will connect you directly to our sales team, who will then reach out to you, and we can start that process. If you prefer to talk with me one-on-one, if you don't want to get barraged by sales folks right now, but would rather just chat about metrics, feel free to hit me up. Best way to do that is go find me at about.me/Chris@Domo, Chris @Domo. And gang, one closing thought here, and then I'm actually going to do one more poll, and then we're going to open up to Q&A, is one of the value props that I believe that Domo brings to the table is not just getting you connected into your data. I mean, obviously we can connect into Salesforce and NetSuite and QuickBooks and Jira and Concur and SAP and SQL Server and Hadoop and just literally hundreds of others to be able to get your data on the screen. But just getting data on the screen doesn't do you any good unless you have value around the metrics that you're actually looking at. And I think that's important. I think what's important to note is that the metrics you look at need to align with the goals of your business, or certainly with the goals of your department. And we're going to help you do that. It's all part of your Domo process. In fact, to that end, we've got some attachments that we've provided along with this particular webinar that give you, one, a link to some examples of sales dashboards and some more information about how we help sales leaders, and then also a couple of white papers that we felt might be of value to you, just around things that you should be looking at and considerations that you should be taking when you're looking at metrics-based management around your sales teams and around your pipeline and around revenue as that relates to overall goals of the business. So we're going to dive into QA here in just 1 second, but I've got one more question I'd love to ask for those of you that have been troopers and stayed on the whole time. How effective is your current reporting solution? Is it awesome? You don't have to lift a finger. You just get what you need when you need it. It's a bit manual, but it's not terrible. C, it's challenging. It's a major time suck. Or D, it's just an absolute total nightmare. So go ahead and vote. And then, like I say, we'll dive into the Q&A. I'm guessing we're going to see a fairly even split on this one, but I did a pretty bad job of guessing last time, so I should probably just keep my mouth shut and let you guys vote. And we'll keep this vote open for another, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go ahead and stop, take a look at those results. And it looks like in this particular case, see, again, guys, I was totally wrong. So awesome, I barely have to lift the finger. Sadly, only 6% of you said yes. The good news is, though, that only 13% of you said it was a total nightmare. Literally half of you said that it's challenging, that it's a major time suck. That's not a shocker to me. And 31% of you said that it's pretty good. It's a bit manual, but not too bad. And again, that's part of the value prop of Domo, right? Is we're going to get you the information you need when you need it, but also allow you to get that relevant information. Don't look at 100 metrics that may or may not matter to your business. Let's focus on the 10 or the 15 or 20 that can actually help you positively impact the top and the bottom line. So with that, Karen, I'm actually going to stop and take a breath. Can we dive into Q&A since we've got a couple minutes left?
Yeah, we have a few minutes to go over some questions that have popped in throughout the webinar. And once again, I'd encourage you to use that questions button at the top if you'd like to reach Chris live right now with a question. And let me start. A few of you have actually asked, Chris, will this be available in a recorded version? And the answer is yes. You will have access to this recording. Both BrightTalk and Domo will have them shared on their website for viewing on demand at a later time. So this will always be accessible to you if you need to come back to it. Okay, let's go into some of the other questions here. Chris, I am one of those people who clicked Total Nightmare for reporting. How can Domo help me?
Just bring a lot of cash. No, I'm just kidding. We get this question a lot. And by the way, I'm proud of you for saying it's total nightmare. I'm proud of you for owning up to it, because recognizing you have a problem is the first step towards solving it. So what we do in the case of Domo is we're going to talk to you about your data, right? Where your information's being stored. You know, hey, Chris, I've got data in Salesforce. Hey, I've got it in NetSuite, so on. But more importantly than that, we're going to have conversations with you around two things. One, what have you got today, and why isn't it effective in your opinion? And two, what are the overall goals of the business? And using that information and leveraging that against the experience of us having done this hundreds and hundreds of times with other customers, we can now start to define a path to success for you. And typically the way that that's done is by identifying metrics that actually matter, that are relevant to you, going to get the data that you've got to actually support those metrics, and then getting those on the screen inside of Domo. And keep in mind, gang, this can be an iterative process. This may not be something where you get it right 100% out of the gate. There may be certain metrics, or based on the way certain data is coming in, that this will evolve over a period of weeks or months as people start managing to these particular metrics. But again, you're not going to go it alone. We're going to help you do this, not just from a data perspective, but also from that overall cultural and organizational perspective of looking at that data the right way and ensuring that you've got numbers that are actually relevant that can help you, improve the bottom line, improve the top line, retain or increase customer satisfaction, whatever those specific goals are. It's a great question. No one answer for everybody, but we'd love to chat with you in more detail and talk about how we might be able to help.
Okay, and I have a note coming in from Kanisha, and she is writing, I have most of my reporting in Excel. Can you leverage that?
Great question. I'd be shocked if there was any attendee on this webinar that wasn't using Excel for at least one piece of data. Excel is the world's most pervasive BI tool and database. And the answer to me is absolutely yes. We can do a couple of things. One, we can actually use the Excel spreadsheets that you're already working on right now as data in Domo and get you up and running literally in a matter of hours so that you can start to manage the information in a one-stop shop on any device using the Domo platform. But more importantly, you may find that once you do that, there are certain numbers that you look at in more detail than others. There are certain numbers that you rely on more often than others. And as we identify those through the use in the system, we can then eliminate the Excel spreadsheet. Instead of using the spreadsheet to feed Domo, let's go get the source data that was being used to power the spreadsheet in the first place. In other words, let's eliminate the middleman. And the beauty of Domo is once I go get that source data, I don't have to rebuild the reports. I can actually change the engine on the plane in mid-flight. So let's leverage that work that you're already doing, and then down the road, let's identify how can we get Excel out of that picture altogether, at least as far as the data source is concerned.
Okay, and she just wrote in, thanks so much, Chris, makes sense.
Cool.
All right, and it looks like we only have a few more minutes and about 10 more questions outstanding. It looks like I'll get to one here, but if we haven't been able to answer your question, know that we will get to you after the webinar. And the last question is from Thomas, and he writes, Chris, how fast can I get something up and running like this?
Good question. Thomas may not like the answer because the answer is it depends. Obviously, depending on where the data is sitting, depending on how we're going to get access to that information, we're going to be relying on whoever's holding the keys to those kingdoms. But here's the good news, Thomas. In the majority of cases, we're talking hours or days before you've got an actual actionable operational dashboard that you can use, again, on any device. Now, that may not be complete. That may just be the first taste or first phase, and from there we grow it out. But just as we were talking about a moment ago, we don't have to just go directly against those source systems. So if you've got an IT department or a BI group that is, shall we say, restrictive on who they give access to from a data standpoint, if you're already getting reports out of other systems or you've got Excel spreadsheets or Google Docs, we can use those to be banging away in hours and get you information up on the screen. Then, as you build momentum and you build a case for Domo, if you're not in a position of power to influence IT or BI, as Domo becomes more pervasive in the organization, it typically becomes easier to get your hands on the keys to that data kingdom so that we can now start to bring in additional data points and start to look at additional metrics inside of that.
Okay, and I see continued questions to come in. Unfortunately, the time for our webinar has come to an end. We will reach out to you individually if we have not answered your question. And as a reminder, we'd like to encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions at sales@domo.com, or feel free to reference this on-demand webinar that will be available in just a few minutes to you. Well, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate you spending it with us. Thank you, Chris, for that great information. And we look forward to working with you in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, gang.